Hello, welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you're all doing fantastic. Good evening, good day to everybody, wherever you are in the world. And today, as you know, I'm going to take questions that you have asked in the comments. Lots of interesting questions have come in. So I'm going to take those very briefly. Let me see who all is there on the live chat. I can see Shailaja, Dr. Surikant Dagar, Amai Tulpule, Ombe Kerikal, hello. Vishak Nair, Pranay Paul from Kolkata, hello. GSR, Kaustubh Jaiswal, Lokesh M, WRV 1313, Karan Nalawat, Pamel Nandi, Shriram Munde, Gaurish, KB, Gaurav, Krish Saini, Isabella, Giridhar, Strangely Proton, Xmas, Ymas, Zemus, Ubendran, Mek E Tech, Hani Sharma, Surendra Gupta, Ritwij Majumdar, Geopolitical Dube Jaiho, Shamik Ray, Rahul Dunake, Giridhar, uh, Ranveer, Raina, Shivendu Suryavanshi, Vansh Kumar Sharma, Pawan Bhatt, Bharat, that is Bharat, Jay Guman, Feminist Slayer, Tanish Kumar, Vansh, again, Abhishek Kothal, Threat Ripper, Jitu Chetri, Savraj, Rakshit Mishra, Kunal Nagarkoti, Akash B.A., McLovin, Kaustubh Jaiswal, Space KGB Agent, Martin Nath, Anmol Kumar, Manisha Methi, Gaurav, Sushil Pathak, Wiseman, Karan Nalawat, Shagun Chopra, Basant 007, Udipta Dekha, Krish Saini, and everybody else. Priyanka Javalia, Avinash, Sunil Kumar, Giridhar, Ansh Mittal, and everyone else. Okay, so what questions do we have? Lots of questions. So let us go ahead with the questions. I can even see Joseph Stalin here, who is greeting us from the USSR. Greetings, great leader. Okay, let's take up the questions. What questions do we have? Okay, the first question is by Arka Indra 11. This is the first time asking a question after almost 2 years. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As a Bengali, I was paying much attention to the current situation in East Pakistan. Some of the high ranking military personnel are relatives of Sheikh Hasina, and she did some good economic growth there, very good growth, yes. After the situation cools down, the situation concerning the coup, maybe in 5 or 6 years, can we see Sheikh Hasina again contesting there as a PM candidate and maybe winning? What's your opinion about silently taking Chittagong region in India by slowly cutting it off from mainland East Pakistan as it's a Hindu majority area? Right, that's the question. So how do I see things going? I think it's very early days in the current regime in East Pakistan, the current military regime. Mohammed Yunus is this puppet prime minister who's been installed by the Americans, but it's a military government. The coup happened. When did the coup happen? The coup did not happen when the students were protesting on the streets. The coup happened when the Bangladesh army military gave Sheikh Hasina 45 minutes to leave the country. That's the coup. The military executed the coup. So it's a military government that you have in power in East Pakistan, just like in West Pakistan. So it's very early days right now. They're still getting things in order. They're still putting up appearances and so on. And of course, some of, like you say, some of the military personnel were are relatives of Sheikh Hasina. Well, that's how it goes when it comes to money and power. Even family sometimes doesn't matter, as we can see in East Pakistan. So maybe in 5 or 6 years, do we see Sheikh Hasina again contesting? I mean, returning to East Pakistan and contesting as a PM candidate, maybe winning? I think that's a far-fetched scenario. I think she probably won't return there to East Pakistan. She's currently in India and she'll stay in India because that's the safe place where she's safe. Where she is safe. The West doesn't want to give her refuge there because they would like her. Well, she was anti-West. I am sure the West would have attempted to buy her off as well, the same way that they were able to buy off the Bangladesh military. So I'm sure they must have attempted to buy off Sheikh Hasina, and she rejected. She would have rejected those offers. So she won't get any uh, safe haven in the West. So I don't see Sheikh Hasina returning to Bangladesh politics, East Pakistan politics. Probably won't happen. And that's what she has said through one of her through her son, I believe. So I think it's highly unlikely. I would not say it's impossible that she may return and contest elections. I think it's highly unlikely. that Sheikh Hasina will return to East Pakistan and be a PM candidate and even win. Less likely, very unlikely. Now, what about the Chittagong region? For that, we have to look at the map. Where's the map? Here's the map. So the question is, should India silently take the Chittagong region into India, incorporate it into India by slowly cutting it off from mainland East Pakistan? It's a Hindu majority area and so on. So the region we're talking about is the Chittagong Hill Tract region. So as you can see, we have the city of Chattogram or Chittagong over here, and it's a region that neighbors Burma and various parts of far eastern India, including Mizoram and Tripura. And as you can see, there's a chicken's neck here as well. If you look at this, you will see that it's about 25, 28 kilometers wide. That's the small sliver of land that connects the Chittagong region to the rest of East Pakistan. So it's extremely feasible, extremely easy actually for a military operation to cut off this region from the rest of East Pakistan. So militarily, it's definitely very feasible. It's no big deal. So that's the Bangladeshi chicken neck, which is similar to the Indian chicken neck over here, the Siliguri corridor, which is about 22, 23 kilometers wide, a strategically important region. Similarly, the same goes for Chattogram, Chittagong, that region. And historically, that's a Hindu and Buddhist majority region. I simply don't understand why it was made part of East Pakistan. So the question is, can India quietly, silently, gradually incorporate this region, Chittagong Hill Tracts, into India? I think such a thing can't be done silently or quietly. The moment you make a move, the East Pakistanis will howl in protest, obviously. They may even attempt some kind of military operation, which we'll not go into. But the thing is, it's very easy to take if India wants to take it. But we have to understand that this new nation, or this revamped nation, this newly minted American client state, has the umbrella of US protection over it. If India does such a move, the Americans will claim that India is behaving just like they say Russia in Ukraine, and they're going to impose sanctions on India. They want India to make a bad move. They want India to make a mistake. I don't think it makes sense for India to do that right now, to make a move on Chattogram, on the Chittagong Hill Tracts region. Not right now. Right now, there are bigger problems afoot in the region, and that's something that India needs to look at more proactively compared to taking Chittagong, which eventually will happen, but not as of this moment in time. Right now, there are bigger problems and bigger issues that India has to deal with in this region. And that's, I guarantee you, what India is focusing on right now. Next question is by Sayani Methi. Mohammed Yunus, the puppet Prime Minister of East Pakistan, he recently said in an interview that he wants to revitalize SAARC. SAARC has already been replaced by BIMSTEC, which is more meaningful. Then why does he want to revive SAARC? So Mohammed Yunus wants to revitalize and revive SAARC. First of all, Mohammed Yunus is a nobody. He is a nobody. He is simply a puppet who has been placed as the face of the military regime, so as to give the military regime a little bit of respectability. And as we know, he is deeply associated with the US establishment, and he's their guy. But politically, he's a nobody. So when a nobody, a puppet, says that he wants to do this or do that, he's essentially it's essentially the words of his masters that are coming out of his mouth, right? So what is SAARC? SAARC is now defunct. It's obsolete. India has completely sidelined SAARC. There is no activity on the SAARC front. SAARC is the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. BIMSTEC is Bay of Bengal, something or the other. It's an organization, a multilateral organization devoted to economic cooperation and other cooperation between Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, Thailand, etc. This geographical area. So one can say to some extent it's an alternative to SAARC on the eastern front for India. So if Mohammed Yunus is saying that he wants to revitalize SAARC, the question we have to ask ourselves is, why has SAARC been devitalized? right? If he wants to revive SAARC, why has it been devived? Is the question we have to ask ourselves. And who has done it? We have done it. India, the Narendra Modi government, Mr. Modi himself, has gone ahead and made SAARC dysfunctional. SAARC doesn't exist except on paper anymore, right? Why have we done this? Because SAARC works very fine, except for one big problem: Pakistan. Wherever Pakistan exists, there are problems. So we just don't want to be running an organization in which Pakistan is a member. We just don't want it. We want to completely sideline and marginalize Pakistan and anything that comes with Pakistan. So SAARC includes Pakistan. So we have shut down SAARC essentially. So if Mohammed Yunus, the puppet prime minister of East Pakistan, wants to revitalize SAARC, it means that he wants to bring Pakistan back into the picture. Because Pakistan is the other big vassal state of the US in the region. The US now has two vassal states, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. West Pakistan is the one that one of the Sharif brothers is currently the puppet prime minister of. So the two vassals will now synergize and they will try to create mischief and problems for India in a variety of ways, whatever is possible for them. That's what Mohammed Yunus is trying to do. He's echoing the words. He's essentially, his masters are speaking through him. They want SAARC back in the equation. They want more problems for India. And Mohammed Yunus is a nobody. Let him say whatever he wants. He can go ahead and start SAARC again if he wants, but without India's participation, SAARC doesn't exist. So, and nobody else will go along with that. So that's the deal. They're just trying to create mischief and problems for India. That is the entire purpose of Mohammed Yunus's existence. Okay, Pramukh D says, will the United States impose sanctions on India if our government starts deporting illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators? And Tushar Kalburgi says, how will the US react if the government of Bharat starts to deport all the illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators into present-day East Pakistan? The first question is, the first point is that we have to recognize the fact that there's a gigantic number of East Pakistani Bangladeshi infiltrators who currently exist in India. I think around 2014, the government had said that there are about 15 million Bangladeshis in India, 5 crore. That's in 2014. And since then, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. So if I were to give a very rough guesstimate, I would say the number must have doubled by now. Okay, maybe 100 million, 10 crore illegal East Pakistani infiltrators in India who currently would be residing in India. They have this entire industry which gives them placements in various parts of India, integrates them with various other Bangladeshi infiltrators who already reside in India, gives them documentation, Aadhaar cards, whatnot. So that industry is entirely in place in Bharat, and they are able to send Bangladeshi infiltrators, Rohingya infiltrators to the far and wide areas of India, including in Jammu and Kashmir. We know that. Now, I would imagine that one of the reasons why the government of India did not take any action about this is that Sheikh Hasina was in power, and rounding these people up and deporting them to Bangladesh would to a large extent cripple the Bangladeshi economy. We didn't want that to happen. But now that Bangladesh no longer exists, it's East Pakistan, it's a hostile nation, maybe it makes sense to send back these Bangladeshi East Pakistani infiltrators. That would be a long drawn out process. 100 million is no small number. That's a gigantic number. It's bigger than most countries, bigger than the population of most countries. But let's say India does that. Let's starts the process in Assam or wherever and starts sending 2,000 back every day. Hypothetically, okay, as an example, what will happen? Well, first of all, the entire ecosystem within India, the anti-India ecosystem that exists within India at various levels and various institutions infiltrated everywhere, they will start a hue and cry about this, a huge hue and cry about this. The Indian media, whichever is bought over by the anti-India element, they will start a big hue and cry. And that will be the cue for the global media to start howling in protest. And they'll say that India is without reason, without giving a fair trial or whatever. India is indulging in human rights abuses, and India is indulging in selective targeting on the basis of religion and whatnot. They're going to make all these stories. And And they will definitely, I guarantee you, they'll succeed in tarnishing the reputation and name of India. It's going to be a very successful campaign. The entire Western media world will ecosystem will jump on board on this. So you will have various German publications like DW and whatnot. Uh, French publications will be on board. All the European publications will be on board. This, media outlets. Uh, in the UK, you will have the Guardian, the BBC, who will devote vast amounts of journalistic real estate to this, and obviously the New York Times, Washington Post. They will create this entire narrative globally. Australian media will be on board, and so on. They will come together and combine to create this vast, gigantic, concerted avalanche, this narrative against India that will be very bad for India's reputation. You travel abroad, people will look at you in a very bad way. That's what they'll do, and that will be just with the start. If India still persists, they may even impose sanctions upon India. So that's the deal. That's how powerful the ecosystem is. I think we are saddled with these illegal infiltrators for some time at least. And like I said, right now may not be the time to deal with the illegal East Pakistanis in India. Obviously, it's a huge threat for India. It's a very powerful asset the Americans have within India. If they want to unleash mayhem, they can, using the illegal East Pakistani infiltrators. They can do that. So that's, in a way, it's a ticking time bomb, but probably not one you want to defuse right now. Yeah, because we have bigger problems in the region, like I said, in India's Far East. That is something India will have to deal with on a more priority basis, probably in alignment with maybe one or two other countries that are kind of in alignment with us, perhaps. Okay, TechWise 360 says Putin has said that NATO will be in direct conflict with Russia if Ukraine uses the Western long range missiles. Is the situation that bad right now? So, what's happened? So, since the special military operation began in February 2022, the West, the US, and its various minions, puppets, have been supplying Ukraine with arms, ammunition, and so on, including short range uh, things, missiles, whatever, even long range missiles, with the caveat that Ukraine will only use short range weapon systems and artillery and whatever across the border with Russia. And whatever long range missile systems the Ukrainians may have, they will use it only within Ukrainian territory, which, in the eyes of Ukraine, is currently occupied by Russia. So that's been the deal. Now it looks like the Americans will be okay with giving Ukraine the go ahead to use long range missile systems for cross border strikes into Russian territory, deep into Russian territory. And I believe that the missile system that's being spoken about right now is the Storm Shadow cruise missile. So this, depending on where you look, what source you look at, this missile system seems to have a range of between 250 kilometers to 550 kilometers, depending where you look, what source you're looking at. So it's a reasonably, I would call it a medium range missile system, but you can say it's no longer tactical and short range. So you can call it a long range missile system. So using this missile system, the Ukrainians could hit deep into Russian territory. Let's take a look at the map and let's see how far they could go. So we're talking about Ukraine here. So let's say, so we know that they are in control of Kharkiv. And let's see, if you go to Voronezh, it's 250 to 60 kilometers. So they can definitely hit Voronezh. How far is, let's say, Moscow from northern Ukraine? Moscow is about 545 kilometers. So it's at the outer range of the Storm Shadow cruise missile system. So using this cruise missile system or any other cruise missile system, maybe a longer range one, they could hit Moscow and hit deep into Russian territory. So that's a whole different paradigm we're looking at. That's a whole different kind of warfare we're looking at. Thus far, the Ukrainians, they have not been allowed by NATO, by the West, by the Americans to do this. Now it looks like they will get the go-ahead to do that. But here's the deal. These weapons systems, missile systems, they have to be long-range systems. You have to input coordinates into them. You have to input a flight path into these missile systems so that they know where to fly and what to hit. And only NATO technicians are allowed to do this. So essentially, you will have a missile system, a missile that's going to be fired from Ukrainian territory into Russia, and a NATO technician who will either be American or European, Western European, will go and input the coordinates of the target and the flight path into the missile. So now you have direct NATO involvement. Do you understand the difference? Until now, it was a short-range systems that the Ukrainian army was using. Now, the order to fire may be given by a Ukrainian soldier, general, whatever. The button will be pressed, but the inputs will be fed into the system by NATO technicians. At least that is what Putin says. So now, if this happens, it's going to be a whole different kind of warfare, a whole different level of warfare. And Vladimir Putin has spoken about this, and he has said that if NATO allows the Ukrainians to use long-range missiles against Russia, he's going to consider it to that. He's going to consider this to mean that NATO is now directly at war with Russia. There is no proxy in between anymore. The proxy was Ukraine. Now it's NATO versus Russia straight away. And he considers that to be a whole different kind of warfare, a whole different escalation. And he says that Russia will respond appropriately. So we are staring at a significant level of escalation here. Now, how would Russia respond? Russia has all different kinds of ways of responding, a variety of ways in which they could respond. This means that they will no longer target targets. They will no longer, hit out at targets merely within Ukraine. They will now be free to hit out at targets and target locations that are within NATO nations or assets that belong to NATO nations. One example is they could take out potentially a British aircraft carrier using one of their hypersonic missiles, perhaps the Zircon missile or whatever. They could do that as a warning. So we're looking at significant escalation if the West allows the Ukrainians to use long-range missile systems against Russia. Now, what should we make of this? The Western commentary that comes out from the higher echelons of the US military and NATO is that Putin is bluffing. And if Russia's red lines existed, they have been crossed long ago. That's the kind of commentary that's coming out of the West, of NATO, of the US. Now, understand one thing. Putin never bluffs. From the time when he was in charge of a single city until where he has reached now, he has never bluffed. He makes it a point to remind people, to remind the world that he has never bluffed. His words have meaning. His words carry weight. When he says something, he means it and he does it. And the US would like us to believe that no, it's all bluff and there are no red lines and we have already crossed the red lines and the Russians did nothing. So we are looking at two very different versions of what's happening in the world, two very different narratives. And one of this is correct, one of this is false. So I hope that this escalation doesn't happen. I hope the Americans don't give the Ukrainians the go-ahead to use these long-range weapons, because in my estimation, the Russians will respond appropriately, like they say. What is appropriate? They're going to decide what appropriate is, but it's not going to be fun. It's going to be a big escalation, and then the US will use that as the pretext to escalate further. And you see what's happening. You're going up very rapidly up the chain of escalation, and what's up there at the top? World annihilation, nuclear exchange, which is the end of the world. We never want to even consider that. So who's escalating right now? The Americans are escalating. They should step back. They should calm things down. They should de-escalate. But no, they're trying to escalate further. So that's where we are. Very dangerous days we are living through right now. Very dangerous days. So that's the deal with that. Now, what's the next question? Nicholas Luminato says, talk about the Sri Lankan elections. And Kishnant, okay, says, can you talk about the Sri Lankan elections? Which candidate will be the best for India? So, yes, Sri Lanka's election is coming up, the presidential election. So, let's recap what's happened of late in Sri Lanka. So, Sri Lanka underwent a sovereign debt default in 2022, and as a consequence of that, in the entire financial economic crisis that ensued, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was ousted as the president of Sri Lanka sometime in 22, I think July 2022. And since then, we've had Ranil Wickremesinghe, who's been the president. There was a brief interregnum in between, but Ranil Wickremesinghe is the current incumbent president. Now, the Sri Lankan Election Commission has said that the upcoming presidential election will happen on the 21st of September this year. So today is what? Today is the 15th of September. So less than a week to go for the Sri Lankan presidential election. Now, there's a number of candidates and parties who are in the fray in the presidential election. We have the incumbent current president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who, strangely enough, is running as an independent candidate. I'll not go into the reasons why. So he's running as an independent candidate for president. Then there is the opposition leader, Sajith Premadasa, who's the son of the former president, Rana Singhe Premadasa. So Sajith Premadasa is the opposition leader. He is running for president. Then you have Anura Kumara Dissanayake, who's the leader of the National People's Movement. So he's the third guy. His party has historically and of late been rather critical of India's involvement in Sri Lanka. They have been suspicious of the Chinese involvement in Sri Lanka as well. But Dissanayake recently visited India a few months ago, the first quarter of this year. So it looks like he may be, or his party may be, more favorably inclined towards India of late. Then Namal Rajapaksa, the son of the former former president Mahinda Rajapaksa, is also standing for election, and so on. So that is the deal right now. So now what's happened in Sri Lanka is that Sri Lanka has slipped into poverty in the past 4-5 years. In 2019, about 11% of Sri Lankans were living under the poverty line. Right now, it's almost 25%. Disaster. The economy has backslid very badly. And there are all kinds of issues in Sri Lanka. So what are the issues that the presidential election will be fought on? First of all, reduction in corruption. There is apparently tremendous corruption in Sri Lanka. Reduction of the tax burden on middle class working citizens. Well, sounds similar to India, but yeah, apparently they are being taxed heavily, and they would like the tax burden to be reduced. Then the need to ensure the stability of prices of essentials in Sri Lanka, the need to keep inflation steady in Sri Lanka, and then there are other issues like accountability for the economic bankruptcy. So Sri Lanka went bankrupt. It defaulted on its sovereign debt and so on in 2022. So who's going to be accountable for this, and what action is going to be taken about that? That's another issue. Constitutional reforms, economic reforms. Then you had this terrorist attack, 2019 Easter Sunday attack, bombing attack on church and all that. So people want legal action to be taken speedily against the perpetrators or the terrorists who were behind this attack. And there are all kinds of delays, apparently procedural delays. There's lack of transparency. There is allegedly political interference in the matter, all that. So these are some of the issues. That there is the Chinese investment inflows and debt that Sri Lanka owes to China. Many of these projects that the Chinese undertook are non-performing. There is no return on the investment. Hambantota Port is an example. The Mathala Rajapaksa International Airport near Hambantota, the Colombo Lotus Tower. All of these projects have sent Sri Lanka into a debt trap, and they owe this lots of money to China. And all of these things put together sent Sri Lanka into the financial crisis, bankruptcy. And India was the first country to help Sri Lanka. India provided an extended lifeline of more than $4 billion. And India also provided a $1 billion credit line to Sri Lanka to help the country overcome the immediate crisis. So India has been the first responder. India has been doing that. And so that's the background. That's what's happened in brief. So you have three, four candidates. The current president is probably the front runner, and Sajid Premadasa also is one of the major candidates, the Sanayake, etc. So, who's gonna be good for India is the question. I think whoever is willing to cooperate with India, perhaps the Sanayake, he seems to be favorably inclined towards India. Ranil Wickremesinghe is probably one can regard as a Western, pro-West kind of leader, an IMF guy, perhaps Wickremesinghe. But whoever is willing to work with India, um, and strengthen India Sri Lanka cooperation and so on is gonna be good for India. Right now, I'm not sure if any of these candidates has what it takes to solve all the problems, but the country needs to go forward. So that's the deal right now. Election in less than a week's time. I am not by any means an expert on Sri Lankan politics, but this is what I can give. This is the kind of overview I can offer you, and let's see what happens in 6 days' time in Sri Lanka. Okay, Vamshi Krishna Gottam 5077 says, I recently read that international election observers have arrived in Sri Lanka to monitor the presidential elections. Why do they get involved in a country's internal election process? Well, I assure you that you will not have international election observers in an election in, let's say, Italy or France or Norway or Denmark. You won't have uh, international election observers in elections in Canada, in New Zealand, in Australia, in the UK, in the US. So, what's the deal? So, these so called international election observers are generally individuals from certain Western countries who come to observe the electoral process in a more backward country. Sri Lanka is an eastern country, brown people, right? Brown people. They must be very backward. So their electoral process has to be observed and monitored so that the world can know whether it's been a fair and transparent election or not. And similarly, when there are elections in India, these international election observers descend upon India like a horde of vultures, and the same happens in various other Eastern nations. So I would say, so it's just this superiority complex that we are superior to you, and most likely your electoral process is flawed, not up to the mark, not up to our standards. We in the US have flawless elections. See 2020, what happened? How flawless it was. Hmm? What a joke. So I think when the upcoming presidential election happens in the US, probably November or whenever it is this year, I think India should send a team of, let's say, 2,000 or 3,000 election observers to observe the election and monitor the progress of the election and ensure that the election is held as per international standards and there is no rigging and no skullduggery. I think India should do that. India should send observers, a team of maybe 2,000 or 3,000 observers. I would urge the government of India to do this, to ensure that the world, the civilized world, knows that there is hopefully free and fair elections happening in the US transparently. And if there is any issue, then it should be brought to light. Okay. Okay, Sabir Kazi says, I was calculating the US power while setting aside emotions, propaganda, Chinese hype, and concerns about US decline. Then I realized that the true strength of the US lies in its strong fundamentals, including a robust business environment, an advanced education system, leading companies, and a formidable defense industry. Additionally, the US exerts significant global influence through financial control, such as the US dollar, which is the world's reserve currency, international institutions like the WHO, the UN, and the World Bank, and and the vast network of 750 plus military bases, which are extraterritorial in nature. In comparison, Russia, China, and India are nowhere near the US. What's your take on this? So what you say makes a sense. The question is, what are the components that go into constructing the score, calculating the score for a nation's power? And when we're talking about power, we're talking about hard power. Otherwise, you will have all kinds of random, not random, but all kinds of subjective factors that you will have to include. So, what are the main components of a nation's hard power score? First of all, the land area that's available to a nation, because that gives you an indication of how much resources the nation has access to. First of all, land area. Second, population. A large population gives you more manpower, which is good for you. Population is a factor. Then you have your national GDP, annual GDP. What's your annual GDP is very important. Then your defense expenditure year, your military budget for annually, the latest one. That's what goes into it. And then there are factors like the number of nuclear weapons you have, in case you have any. That is a significant factor. And also your power projection ability. How much of the global area can you cover in terms of power projection? What percentage of the global area, let's say, in terms of power projection? Then you consider risk factors like energy self-sufficiency, sovereignty, how sovereign the nation is, and so on. So that's how, these are the ingredients that go into making the soup. Okay, that's a nation's hard power score. Now, strong fundamentals obviously matter, robust business environment, but how do you assign a score to a nation's business environment and its robustness? It's kind of subjective. You really can't. Then how do you assign a score out of 10, let's say, to a nation's education system? You can do it subjectively and you may be able to do a good job of it, but you really can't do it precisely and accurately. Now, the quality of your companies, once again, it's kind of subjective. Defense industry, you can put a score on that based on the annual defense expenditure. So many of these things are to a large extent subjective, and if you ask five different experts or researchers, they will probably give you five different answers for the scores of these things, like the quality of the education system, the robustness of the business environment, and so forth, so on and so forth. Which is why you typically don't uh, include those factors, those subjective factors, in constructing uh, a nation's hard power score. The only factors you can reliably use to construct a hard power score, calculate a hard power score, are publicly available numbers that no one can dispute. That's how you do it. That way, nobody can dispute your calculations, or at least the reasoning behind your calculations. The equation, the formula that you use is up to you, and some portion of that has to be classified, hopefully. But that's how you do it. But overall, you're right that the US is way, way, way ahead of all other nations. Although the one nation that comes kind of close to the US, it's about half of the US, slightly more than half the US's hard power score is Russia. And then you have China, which is nowhere close to Russia. And then you have India, which is about 3.5 times smaller than China in terms of hard power score. So that's the way the world is currently, the power equations are currently aligned in the world right now. So I, to a large extent, agree with you. I wish there was a reliable way of unambiguously assigning a score to a nation's business environment's robustness, to its education system, and so on. But you really can't, which is why I don't include those factors in calculating a nation's hard power score. But the factors that I did mention, I do include those. Okay, Harshil Agarwal asks a pretty long question, but interesting. Let's see. The Global Times wrote an article criticizing Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's foreign minister, but deleted the English version just a few hours later. China recently extradited a Khalistani terrorist, and the Maldives, which is a Chinese vassal, has started engaging with India again, even after pro-China government. Yes. What's cooking between the two nations, India and China? And editing this later on 13th September because of a few developments, Mr. Doval, India's national security advisor, met with China's foreign minister, Mr. Wang Yi, and both of them issued a joint statement for resolving the Ladakh standoff urgently being the operative word here. The US has started to counter this by sanctioning Chinese companies for the involvement in the temporary nation's ballistic missile program. And the Americans are offering their 50-year-old F-16 jets to India. What's your thoughts on this? Is RIC really a possibility because of threats from Uncle Sam? Lots happening. So you've done a good job of outlining what's happening. The Global Times has historically been, so what is the Global Times? It's a Chinese publication. They are active on Twitter and they have their own website. Twitter generally tweets excerpts of what they, or abstracts of what the articles are, and they link to the articles on the Global Times website. And it's a Chinese government mouthpiece, just like the BBC is a British government mouthpiece, and the New York Times, Washington Post, etc., are American government mouthpieces. So every nation typically has one. India doesn't have it. Of course, India is okay. Let's not go into that matter. So the Global Times is one of the Chinese government's mouthpieces, publications, right? And historically, they've had a rather strident anti-India tone, the Global Times and their publications. Okay, so recently this article came out criticizing India's foreign minister Dr. Jaishankar, and a few hours later the article vanished. It was pulled out. It was pulled. It was deleted from the Twitter account and from the website itself. So that's interesting. What? Why did they delete an article that's critical of the Indian foreign minister? Interesting. The Chinese recently extradited a Khalistani terrorist to India. That's incredible. That's unheard of. China cooperating with India in matters of terrorism, unheard of. First in history, I'm sure. What's going on? And Maldives has a pro-India government. Their leader Mr. Muizu, has had this anti-India campaign, India out campaign. He's known to be a pro-Chinese politician. So there's a pro-Chinese government in the Maldives, and they after Mr. Muizu came to power, he ordered the eviction of Indian armed forces personnel, a small number that we had, and the withdrawal of Indian companies, and so much more. So and yet now the Maldives is cooperative with India. It's engaging with India. It's awarding projects to Indian companies. All of a sudden, this volte-face has happened. This complete U-turn has happened. So what's going on is the question. What's going on between India and China? And uh, India's NSA, Mr. Doval, met with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who's a very high-ranking leader, very high-ranking official. They issued a joint statement. There is talk of resolving the Ladakh standoff urgently. It started because of Chinese actions. Entirely Chinese created crisis. Obviously, we know that. Now, about 75% of it seems to have seen complete disengagement. About 25% is left, but hopefully that also gets disengaged. So you will have a return to relative normalcy on the India-Tibet border in Ladakh, in the Ladakh region. Something is afoot between India and China, clearly. And the Americans now have sanctioned some Chinese companies for their involvement in Pakistani ballistic missile program. It's so funny. The Americans have propped up Pakistan forever, but they're sanctioning Chinese companies for their involvement in the ballistic missile program. And the Americans are offering F-16 fighter planes to India. And India should not take those. Those are, well, look, the F-16 program is about 50 years old. It doesn't mean the fighters they are offering to India were constructed 50 years ago. There'll be new jets constructed anew with reasonably good technology, more modern technologies, etc. But you don't want to be part of to have US weaponry, because it gives them immense control over your military, as the Australians discovered with the F-60 with the F-15s, which refused to lock onto targets the Australians wanted them to lock onto. You don't want to be saddled with a bunch of crippled aircraft. You don't want that. So obviously India, if India has any sense, will pass on the offer of F-16s. So the Americans clearly are sensing that something is cooking between India and China, and they are trying to make some moves accordingly. So that's the deal. So the final question that Harshil is asking is RIC really a possibility because of threats from Uncle Sam? So RIC is a coalition of Russia, India, China. That's what RIC is. Now, Russia and India are on excellent terms. No concerns there. There's a significant amount of convergence and convergence when it comes to the national interests of Russia as well as India. Russia and China get along reasonably fine. They have this cooperation that's been going on for quite some time. A modus vivendi of sorts they have. And then there's India and China. India and China share a long, undemarcated border because the Chinese have steadfastly refused to demarcate the border. And that's the crux of the issue. And the Chinese claim more Indian territory, which is the root cause of all the hostility and the bad blood between the two nations. And they have this practice of salami slicing, attempting to salami slice into Indian territory, cross over the perceived line of actual control, and so on and so forth. Chinese aggression. That's why there is this issue between India and China. The question is, can RIC happen? First of all, why should RIC happen? Why should India, China, Russia come together? The answer is very simple. All three are being targeted by the US. Russia is facing the brunt of the whole gamut of US sanctions right now. China is involved in a trade war with the US. The Americans are denying China various kinds of technology. The Chinese are retaliating in kind when it comes to rare earth metals and whatnot. Chinese want Taiwan. The Americans are propping up Taiwan and so much more, right? So China is facing the heat from the US. Russia is definitely facing the heat from the US. And when it comes to India, the Americans are trying to create all kinds of problems vis-a-vis India. They've effected a regime change in East Pakistan. They are in the process of attempting to create an artificial cookie nation, Christian nation, cookie land in India's far east, out of Manipur, Mizoram, and Burma, and parts of Bangladesh, parts of all these territories. That's extremely hostile action. The Americans are indulging in subnational diplomacy and trying to destabilize India through that. So much more. They have so many fronts open. They are funding industrial scale Christian conversions in various parts of India. So much more the Americans are doing. India, China, Russia, all three are facing the heat from the US. When it comes to India, the Americans see India as a future long-term threat if India is allowed to grow. So the growth must stop. So India needs to be destabilized in a variety of ways. That's what they're working on right now. It's quite evident, it's quite open, it's quite blatant actually. So all three big nations, Russia, India, China, the three eastern nations, are facing the heat. Makes sense to come together. And the regime change in Bangladesh, in East Pakistan, has affected China, definitely. China had their own thing going on over there. The regime change in Pakistan, West Pakistan, which happened in 22, turned a Chinese vassal into a US vassal. That's a big loss for China. So they lost East Pakistan as well as West Pakistan. East Pakistan was never really theirs, but they had reasonably okay relationship with Sheikh Hasina's government. Then there's a civil war in Burma, which essentially can be seen as a proxy tussle between the US and China. So the existing Burmese government, the legacy Burmese government, has historically been pro-China. And the Americans have made big inroads there through the cookie terrorists and whatnot. So that's a big setback for China. So that's the situation. So it makes sense for RIC to happen. The three Eastern powers cooperate and pool their resources to some extent together, and that will enable them to withstand the Western pressure better. That's the kind of thing. If it happens, it's in the very, very early stages, if it is going to ever happen. First of all, the question is, how can India ever trust China after all the backstabbing and everything China has done since the 1950s? China simply can't be trusted. So then how can RIC happen? Well, if the Chinese want India's trust, they will have to demonstrate that they are worthy of trust, and India will have to take it on a step-by-step, case-by-case, day-by-day basis. The crux of the matter is the border, which the Chinese have refused to demarcate. The first step is disengagement, which is happening. Very surprising, but it's happening. Next, I think the border demarcation will take time, even if it's done urgently. May take months, maybe take a few years, perhaps 2-3 years. But as a confidence building measure, India and China could do a pilot project somewhere in the neighborhood, let's say, and kind of defang some snakes. So that's something we could do, perhaps. So that's all I'll say about that. Neighborhood. Common neighborhood. India, China. Maybe. Let's see. Okay. Ratnesh Palia says, can a NATO member Turkey join BRICS? In the past, we have seen that France also showed a desire to become a member of BRICS. They wanted to take part in the BRICS summit last year. How would the US look at such a development? So Turkey is kind of the joker in the pack, so to say, when it comes to the NATO nations. The Turks have their own ambitions and their own agenda. Türkiye. Let's take a look at where Türkiye is. But Türkiye is very important for NATO. Why is Türkiye so important for NATO? It's because it commands a strategic position in at the crossroads of what is regarded as Asia and Europe. So Turkey is in possession of the Strait of Bosphorus. This is so the Turkish Straits is the prized possession that Turkey owns. The strait that exists between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, which goes through Istanbul. So that's the Strait of Bosphorus. That's an incredibly important waterway. And then you have the Strait of the Dardanelles, where lots of action happened in World War One, 1915. This is another incredibly important geographical choke point. So Turkey controls two vital choke points between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And any warship that passes through these straits has to display itself. It has to show itself. It cannot pass through unseen, undetected, according to the treaties that have been signed. Essentially, it's about Russia, because the Black Sea region is dominated by Russia. You have Crimea, you have the Ukraine region, you have parts of Russia and Russian dominated territories, and you have the Black Sea Fleet, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which is based in Sevastopol and the other parts of the region. It used to be Odessa as well during the USSR days. Now it's mainly Sevastopol, Simferopol, and so on. So any Russian warship that wants to transit from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean has to pass through the Strait of Bosphorus and the Strait of the Dardanelles. So that is why Turkey is so important for NATO. And Turkey has been rent-seeking. It's based on its geographical location for the longest time and extracting favors from the West. And that's why the US likes to keep Turkey in good humor. And, that's why Turkey gets a little more leeway than other nations in NATO. Now, Turkey has its own imperial ambitions. It used to be the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, they will want to revive the empire someday in the future. And Mr. Erdogan, the current current leader of Turkey, has those oversized or neo-Ottoman ambitions. They are active in parts of Syria. They've been active in parts of Iraq as well, Turkish soldiers, right? It is alleged that they had something to do with ISIS as well, Daesh, whatever you want to call it. Names don't matter. The organization, it actually matters. And they're also involved in North Africa, the Turks. So they have these oversized geopolitical ambitions, and they have this love-hate frenemies relationship with Russia, which goes back to the Ottoman days. Okay. And the Turks have acquired the Russian S-400 system, because of which they were frozen out of the F-35 program by the Americans, and so on and so forth. A lot has gone down in this region. So now coming back to BRICS, once we understand the geographical aspect of it, why Turkey is important because of the straits, the waterways it controls. So Turkey, on the one hand, has its own agenda, which is separate and distinct from that of NATO. They would like to have reasonably good relationship with Russia, which is something that NATO and the Americans won't want, but it's there. Erdogan and Putin have a reasonably decent working relationship. So now, what about BRICS? The Turks seem to have indicated that they want to be a member of BRICS. Well, can you be on two camps in two opposing camps simultaneously? You really can't, right? But the French tried that. They, Monsieur Macron wanted France to become a member of BRICS and participate in the BRICS summit. Obviously, that was vetoed. That was rejected by whatever mechanism BRICS has. And now Turkey. So France is one of the core members of NATO, a long-standing member of NATO. So is Turkey. So now that France obviously was rejected, now Turkey is trying this. So why would Turkey do this? Is it that the Americans have told Turkey to try and infiltrate NATO, just like they may have told France to do that? So is it that Turkey is trying to be a spy within BRICS on behalf of NATO? Or is it that Turkey actually wants to be a part of NATO? I think there's a bit of both. It's a superposition of both uh, possibilities. To some extent, Turkey may act as a spy if it gets into BRICS, a spy on behalf of NATO. Also, Turkey may actually want to be part of NATO and be on the, because it's an Eastern nation anyway, and it would like to gain some benefits from whatever benefits BRICS has to offer. So I think it's kind of both. So what's going to happen? Will Turkey be allowed into BRICS? I think not, because if you're a member of NATO, you essentially, from the perspective of Russia and China at least, you're the enemy, right? India is also kind of on both sides. India is not a member of NATO or a member of anything. India is a member of the Quad, which is not a military alliance. So India is not a treaty member of any anti-Russia or anti-China organization. The Quad can be portrayed to be kind of anti-China, but it doesn't have any such thing in the charter and all that. So that's where you are. So how will the US look at this development? The US probably to some extent may be behind this. They may have told the Turks, try and get into BRICS. They may be behind this. And if they're not, they would be very concerned. But I think they may perhaps be behind such a move. Okay, Rishi Gupta 09 says, why has the Modi government failed to protect Manipur? He has RAW, IB, NIA, full majority in parliament. Still, it's burning for the past 1 year. And Twinkle Pie says that he won't answer this question LMAO. Okay. And Purushottam Jaswani says, what do you think could be the reason for the government not taking completely control of Manipur, even after the military has entered Manipur for a long time, since a long time now? Is the military finding it hard to handle infiltrators? Is Manipur becoming the new Kashmir? Okay, pretty complicated matter. First of all, I am taking the question. Now let's take a look at the region, the far east of India, Manipur, where it is. Okay, that's the region. Okay, I'll take it off screen for some time. The first question is, why has the government of India, the Modi government, not taken complete control of Manipur? So is that true? Is the government not in complete control of Manipur? Probably it's true. I think half of Manipur is overrun by Kuki infiltrators. And wherever the Kukis are, I don't think the government of India has complete control over those regions. It's a mess. And does one blame Modi for this? Well, at the end of the day, he's the prime minister and the buck stops with him, so he has to be blamed. Yes. But who's actually messed up over here? I think there's multiple levels of failure. First of all, in what's happened thus far. Intelligence failure for sure. Did they not see this coming? Hundreds of thousands of illegal infiltrators crossing into India. It's been happening for decades, I understand. But a lot has happened apparently in the past decade or so also. It's been continuing because of the open borders. Now, even if they knew that this is happening, fencing that border will take years. Okay? And there was this agreement between India and Burma before the civil war broke out. So maybe it would have seemed that these people who are crossing over the border will go back because that's the general pattern of movement. But it did not happen, and they settled down in Manipur. And more than half of Manipur, the southern part of Manipur, has been overrun by the foreign infiltrators and terrorists. So there is an intelligence failure for sure. There's also a failure on the part of the whoever has been advising the Modi government about the Far East region, about the Manipur region. Because most central governments don't know much about the far east of India. Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, etc. They don't know anything about this region. Very far-flung area, and the people are hardly visible, so who cares? Kind of like that. So you need subject matter experts and people who have apparently an expertise in the region. So I wonder who the experts were, okay, who have been advising the Modi government about Manipur. Those experts, they have messed up royally, okay? They essentially have led the government up the wrong tree. And there are other organizations who are trying to involve all stakeholders. I mean, are foreign infiltrator terrorists stakeholders in India? Really? I'll not even name the organization, but all that is going on even now. So that's what's happened. The illegal infiltration has been happening for decades. Many of these foreigners were settled by successive Indian governments in the 20th century also, continuing the policy of the British, settling foreigners on Indian soil. What kind of imbecilic policy is that? But that's what the successive Indian governments did in the 20th century. And we've had this open border policy with Burma, because Burma has historically been a friendly nation, which it is. But see what it has resulted in when the open border policy was weaponized against us. Now, there is foreign involvement in the region, without a doubt. So the Burmese government has historically been kind of pro-China. But the US has got involved in the past 20 years in a very major way, especially during the Barack Obama regime. So let's not go into the whole story of that. But there is significant American involvement in Burma. Baptist missionaries are very active there. All the Kukis are a non-Burmese tribe, ethnic group. They don't speak the Burmese language. They don't practice Burmese culture. They don't respect Burmese customs. Nothing. They are foreign to Burma also. They've come in from further east into Burma a few centuries ago, like 2-3 centuries ago, probably from Yunnan in China or thereabouts. So this understanding has to be there in the experts who are advising the government. Clearly, they were clueless, these so-called experts. I'm not naming any particular person. There are some experts who are genuinely respect. Okay, not all, but well, you get the drift. So there is that. Now what happens? So now what about the military? Look, the military, first of all, we have to understand there have been paramilitary forces in the far east of India and Manipur for a very long time. There is to some extent, some involvement of the actual Indian military, which is the Indian Army, which is not paramilitary force. Paramilitary forces are police forces. The Assam Rifles are a police force. They're a paramilitary force. So is the CRPF. Now the Assam Rifles are being shifted out of Manipur for good reason. And that also the government probably did not see coming. Okay, when it comes to the Assam Rifles, what had to be done and what was going on. I'll not go into further details. But yeah, the Assam Rifles it looks like they are being moved out of Manipur, and the CRPF is being brought in. And the Indian military, the actual armed forces, the military is also there in certain numbers. We'll not go into those numbers. Now, how do we deal with foreign infiltrators? The moment you try and move them out or whatever, they have essentially unlimited supplies of arms and ammunition. Okay, these cookie terrorists, where are they getting them from? From Burma. But Burma is in civil war. So where are those factions fighting the civil war getting the arms and ammunition from? The government would probably get supplies from China. But what about others? How come incredibly sophisticated Sig Sauer and whatever arms and ammunition are available to the terrorists? How come they have access to drones? Imagine drone bombing on the capital city of an Indian state. That's what's happening. So it's a disastrous situation, no doubt. The military, Indian armed forces are in place, not for, well, they are there for other reasons. When it comes to the terrorists, the infiltrators, they will have to be dealt with by the paramilitary forces in whatever way is appropriate. National interest must come first, obviously, right? And just because somebody is holding an Aadhaar card or whatever doesn't make them a citizen. That's what happens typically. So it's a very complicated situation. I should not even discuss it in great depth, but understand this. This I will say. Uh, let's put the map back on the screen, and you will understand why I refer to the map. The solution to this problem. Remember Kashmir? Remember the Pakistani terrorism in Kashmir? Here's Kashmir. Where was the solution? Where is the solution to the terrorism that has happened in Kashmir? The solution is not in Kashmir. The solution is west of the border in Pakistan. Right? That's where the root cause is, and that's where the solution lies. Otherwise, you're simply reacting to what's happening on your territory without addressing the problem, the root of the problem, which is outside your territory. Similarly, when it comes to Manipur, the solution is outside of Manipur. It's east of Manipur. And that's where the problem will be solved, whenever it is solved. How long will it take? It depends on a multitude of factors. Now, here's the deal. You have obviously spoken about Prime Minister Modi. The Modi government has failed, and so on, which is true thus far. And do you realize that this makes Prime Minister Modi look very weak? It does. Whenever Mr. Modi says something on Twitter, tweets something, people say, "What about Manipur? What about Manipur? What happened to the 56-inch chest?" True, right? That is a genuine question, and question that, well, the government is keeping quiet on for whatever reason right now. Now, understand this. This has dented Mr. Modi's image, and he can't afford this to happen. So, solution will come. Rest assured. And when it comes, when the hammer falls, it'll fall hard. But there are certain other factors that need to be hammered out before the hammer falls on the terrorists. And those factors are currently being looked at right now. What will happen, or what should happen, is India needs to engage with another aligned nation in this. Strangely aligned, but aligned. And some kind of joint venture will have to be done to resolve the Burma problem in such a way that the actual root cause of the terrorism, which is far away from the region, can't do a thing about it. So what's the root cause of the terrorism that's happening? The cookies are the symptom, right? They have been empowered by somebody and armed by somebody. That's the root cause. So the problem will have to be solved in such a way that the root cause is rendered important in this region. So it's going to have to be a joint venture between India and another aligned country, and the action will be outside of India. That's how I see the solution being brought about. But Mr. Modi knows that he can't afford to be inactive on this front for too long. It's already been more than a year. The entire mayhem started in May last year, apparently out of nowhere. The government is completely caught unawares. Big failure for sure. But now the solution is to be found. The indigenous people of a state who have been staying there for 2,000 plus years are suffering. Terrorists are raining bombs from drones on the capital city of a state in India. And right now the government of India looks very weak and helpless. And this can't continue. So the Indian military does exist. It is there. It needs a certain kind of go ahead at a certain point in time. And I hope it happens sooner rather than later, because it's already very late. Okay, Bobby Epen. Good to see you, Bobby Epen. Bobby says, what do you think about recent findings about the Shroud of Turin? The Shroud of Torino, yes? The Shroud of Turin. So what is the Shroud of Turin? Let's go to Google and see image of Shroud of Turin, shall we? So let us go to our friend Google blank page. And we will say Shroud of Turin. So this is reputed to be a cloth, a linen cloth that bears the image of Jesus Christ. So it is said that this is the cloth at least some claims have been made that this is the original cloth in which the body of Jesus Christ was wrapped after his crucifixion and after he was brought down from the cross. And that's what left behind these markings that depict Jesus Christ with his wounds, the lacerations on his back from the flogging he was given by the Roman soldiers, the injuries on the head from the crown of thorns, and the stigmata on the hands and feet from uh, the injuries that were caused by the nails of the cross, and so on. So that's what the Shroud of Turin is. It apparently surfaced sometime in the 12th or 13th century, and it was immediately denounced by some members of the church, high ranking members of the church, as a forgery. But then it was, after some time, taken to be the genuine article. It was venerated and displayed in a cathedral or church in Turin, Torino. Then in the 19th, 20th century, there have been tests done on it on a scientific basis about to ascertain whether it's the real deal or not. Apparently, they have not been able to find any trace of paint or pigment on this, which indicates it's not a painting. That's something that was done in the 20th century. Then there was radiocarbon dating done sometime in the 20th century, which showed that it dates back to the Middle Ages. Okay, so the radiocarbon carbon 14 dating. So I think the Vatican gave postage stamp sized pieces of this artifact to three different laboratories in three different countries, and all three did carbon testing on this radiocarbon testing, and they all determined the same thing, that this dates back to sometime in the Middle Ages. So it looked like the entire matter was put to the rest. But now there's been a new experiment done on this fabric. X-ray crystallography, I think, and that's come up with a whole different story. So let's take a look at this article. Where shall I go for it? Britannica should be a good source rather than Wikipedia. Wikipedia. Ooh. Let's look at Britannica, or former British colonizers and occupiers. Well, let's see what they have to say about this. So blah blah blah, all that description and so on and so forth, purported history, blah blah, etc etc. Okay, analysis of authenticity. So in 2022, researchers in Italy published the results of a study in which they used the technique of wide-angle X-ray scattering to analyze a small piece of the shroud. The study concluded that the structural degradations of the shroud's linen were fully compatible with those of another linen sample that's been dated according to historical records to 55 to 74 CE. And environmental carbon contamination was suggested as the source of the discrepancy between those findings and the results of the carbon dating tests done in the 1980s. So this new study, 2022 study, its results bolstered the hypothesis that the Shroud of Turin is truly from the time of Christ, although the researchers made no conclusion regarding the shroud's authenticity as a relic, and also noted that further testing is needed to confirm their conclusions. So they have used a different technique, wide-angle X-ray scattering, to analyze a small piece of this artifact, the shroud, and the study has concluded that the structural degradations of the linen are fully compatible with another linen sample that's been dated to about the 1st century AD. So this is another step in the way, in the journey of understanding this particular artifact. It is not a conclusive finding. The researchers themselves have noted that further testing is needed to confirm the conclusions. Now, carbon dating is extremely accurate, but it can go wrong if the material has been contaminated with carbon sources or whatever from other times. So it's known that this shroud has been displayed over the centuries openly in various churches and whatnot. So that could have uh, introduced some contamination of the shroud. And yet, even if some contamination is introduced, the carbon dating results should have been mixed, not entirely conclusive, right? So it still looks like the carbon dating results are to be given more precedence. Maybe we can do newer, more modern testing through carbon dating of a small piece of the sample or something. But it's a process. It's kind of like the Aryan invasion migration tourism myth, right? New results come out and they seem to point in this direction, that direction, but overall, over the decades, the results seem to point in one direction only. Similarly, that's the journey of this shroud. I think it's an interesting piece of finding. I think more, I agree with the researchers, more testing is needed to confirm what they have concluded. They have used a rather unorthodox method, wide angle X-ray scattering, which is not typically what you use to date materials, So it's rather unorthodox, and it has to be corroborated with other methodologies. So I think maybe they can redo the carbon testing, radiocarbon testing once again, and see if they can detect, they can attribute the dating to contamination to the Middle Ages or something. So I think it's too early to draw conclusions based on this, but it's something that has definitely resulted in a big tizzy of excitement in Catholic circles, and now it's being regarded as something that's been um, yeah. So lots of people are regarding that they've been proven right, they've been vindicated, and this is the real deal. I think it's a little early for that, but look, it's a question of faith and belief. If you believe in it, then please feel free to believe in it. That's what I would say. I think it's still too early to draw any conclusions. And even if it's determined beyond any doubt that it dates to the first century AD, even then it doesn't prove that it is the actual cloth that was used to wrap the body of of Jesus Christ, right? It doesn't prove that. But so that's why I say that at the end of the day, it's a question of faith. If you believe, then you believe. That's it. Okay, Imran Naimi says, why do Hindi, Urdu, these two, which are the same language essentially, why do Hindi, Urdu have Afghanistan's Persian words, Dari words, and pronunciations, but not Iranian Persian words? About 98% of the Persian words that Indian people use are from the Afghan dialect, but the Iranians don't use and don't know the meanings of those words. Didn't Persians and Iranians come to India? It's an interesting question, and I wonder why such questions have never been addressed by Indian historians and sociologists, linguists. Interesting questions, good questions. So I am not familiar with the two dialects of Persian. I don't speak Persian. I understand a few words here and there, obviously, like everyone does in India. But I'm not really that familiar with the two versions of Persian, the Afghan version and the Persian version. If you have an Afghan version spoken and a Persian version spoken, I probably won't be able to take to tell the difference, probably. So that's where I'm coming from. But now, assuming what Imran is saying is absolutely correct, that Hindi Urdu has Afghan Persian words, not Persian, Iranian Persian words. The pronunciations and the words are from the Afghan version of Persian. That's interesting. If that's true, it's very interesting. 98% of the Persian words are from the Afghan dialect. Why is that? So, how would one explain that, assuming that is true? We know that the Turkic invasions, let's go to the map. We know that India was invaded by the Turks starting about roughly, let's say, 1,000 years ago. The Ghoris, Ghaznavis, and so on and so forth. And these invasions came through the northwest. And the first part of India that fell to the invasions was Gandhar, which is currently Afghanistan. Currently, it's in the present day, it's a separate nation. Historically, it was part of India, Gandhar. So the first part of India that truly fell to the Turkic invasions and got its demographics and everything else, religious demographics, ethnic demographics, and so on and so forth, altered permanently is Afghanistan. Present-day Afghanistan, historical Gandhar. And from there, from this region, the invasions, wave after wave of invasion, proceeded eastwards into what you could call present-day India, Pakistan. So it makes sense that many of the linguistic terms that came into India would have come through this region. And obviously, it's not like these invaders simply walked through Afghanistan. They would have stayed and lived there for decades and centuries before they were able to make inroads into the other parts of India and Pakistan. So they would have become linguistically attuned to the Afghanistan way of speaking, dialect, etc. And maybe that's how some of these words came into India. That's one explanation that I could offer. Um, and we know that when it comes to the Turco-Mughal Empire, the so-called Mughal Empire, which ruled India for about 2.5 centuries, starting from the time of Humayun, uh, a number of Persian officials took up residence in the Mughal court in Delhi. So the language of the court was Persian, and we're talking about Persian, Iranian Persian, not Afghan Persian. But that never really made its way into the common parlance in India. So the language of the court was the Iranian Persian, but the language of the camp was Urdu. The word Urdu is probably a Mongol word which means camp. So the language of the camp, of the military camp, of the soldiers who were occupying India, Turkic soldiers who were occupying India, that language was a mongrel language mixed. You had the basic Sanskrit vocabulary that was the main structure. On top of that came various local words, also Turkic words and Persian words, and probably these Persian words came into India via Gandhar, via Afghanistan. And maybe that's why that's the Persian parlance that we still use in Hindi, Urdu. I think that's the explanation I would give, and I really wonder why no historian or sociologist has bothered to 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 explore this issue, this question. I wonder why we have linguistics, sociology, and history departments in the country when these interesting questions are not addressed. So I'm really glad and I'm thankful to Imran for asking this question. And that's the kind of answer I would venture. That's the kind of theory I would venture. But one would need to base that on more data. I don't have the data. I saw this question today and I was really intrigued by it, which is why I've picked it and I've attempted to answer it. And I'm pretty sure that the answer I've given is quite logical. But it has to be backed up with actual data, evidence, and all that. So one would need to make a list of the common Persian words that currently exist in Hindi, Urdu, and correlate them with the corresponding synonyms in Iranian Persian and Afghan Persian, and then see where the matches exactly actually are. And assuming that there are way more matches with the Afghan Persian uh, versions, then one would have to go back in time and see which invasive forces stayed how long in Gandhar and then came into India, which would kind of correlate and again and give substance to the theory that I've put forth. That's how one would approach this piece of research from an academic perspective. I think it can be done. Somebody can do a PhD on this, actually. But nobody will do that. They want to do PhDs in caste and oppression dynamics and the evils of Hinduism and the backwardness of India and all that absolute rot. That's why we need to do something about these parasitic humanities departments that are wasting our taxpayer money and ruining the intellects of our bright young students. Anyway, thank you, Imran, for a wonderful question. Great question. Okay, Sanjeev says, why does the rotation of the Earth slow down every year? That's a good question. Good question. Basic physics question, but how many? I mean, I'm glad people are curious about this. So let's take a look at the Earth. This is the Earth. It rotates. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, which means it's rotating in this direction. You get it? It's rotating in this direction. That's how the Earth rotates. And what's the speed of the Earth's rotation? It's one rotation every roughly 24 hours, as we know very well. But here is the deal. See, the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. The solar system is 4.54 billion years old. So when the Earth was a newly formed planet, incandescent, glowing with lava and whatnot, and with a very alien atmosphere, so that's about 4 billion years ago, let's say 4.5. So you go back to that time, the initial days of the new Earth. That time, the Earth's day was way shorter than it is now. It may have been about 6 to 12 hours long, probably around 6 7 hours long when the Earth was newly formed. It's 4.5 billion years before today. So the Earth's day was much shorter, and at that time the Earth was spinning much faster because of the initial angular momentum that it acquired during its formation as part of the protostellar disk that gave rise to the sun and the other planets and other objects in the solar system. So the Earth was spinning much faster because of that initial angular momentum it had acquired. Then, over billions of years, over the next 4+ billion years, the Earth's rotation gradually slowed down. And this happened because of gravitational interactions, mainly with the moon. And the mechanism of the slowing down was through tidal friction. And this still continues today. So it is believed that the Earth day, the period of rotation, it is increasing by about roughly 2 milliseconds every century, which is very slow, but it adds up eventually over hundreds of billions of years, over billions of years. So the rotation slows down primarily because of tidal friction caused by the gravitational interaction between the Earth and the moon. So we know what tides are, right? The sea rises and falls periodically, twice a day, once, whatever it is, right? The moon's gravitational pull on the Earth creates tides in the Earth's oceans. And this causes a bulging effect in the Earth's oceans. But the Earth's rotation causes this tidal bulge to be slightly ahead of the moon. And then the moon's gravity exerts a force on this bulge, creating a drag on the Earth's rotation. And this drag results in a very slow, gradual transfer of rotational energy from the Earth to the moon. And as a result, the rotation of the Earth slows down. And also, it has the effect of having the moon slowly drifting away from the Earth. About 3 4 centimeters per year, the moon is drifting away from the Earth. So it is slowing down the rotation of the Earth, and it's also causing the drifting away of the moon from the Earth. And there's interaction with other solar system bodies, other celestial bodies. The sun also contributes to tidal friction, but the effect is much weaker than that of the moon because the moon is right here. It's right out here. So all that also contributes to the slowing down of the Earth's rotation. And then there is internal friction within the Earth's interior, movements within the Earth's interior, tectonic movements, the movements between the mantle of the Earth, the core of the Earth, that can cause energy dissipation, which can cause changes in the rotational speed of the Earth. Then there is atmospheric movements and oceanic movements. All of these factors contribute to a very small degree, but over millions of years, all of these factors kind of put together, especially tidal friction because of the Earth-Moon interaction, that has collectively led to the gradual lengthening of the Earth's day from about 6 hours long to 24 hours, which we see today. So that's why the Earth's rotation is slowing down. Let's take another question from the world of the natural sciences, which is physics. What happens if we replace the sun with a black hole? This is a good question, yes? So let's first consider replacing the sun with a black hole of the same mass as the sun. So let's say through magic like this, I replace the sun instantaneously with a black hole of the same mass as the sun. So right where the sun is, we put a black hole there and the sun disappears. So what happens? So first of all, we sitting here on the planet Earth will not know about this for 8 minutes. After you replace the sun with the black hole, over here on Earth, we will not know about it for 8 minutes because that's how long it takes for the light of the sun to reach the Earth. It's only after 8 minutes that the sun will go dark. So that's the first effect. The sun goes dark, and so the light disappears. So we suddenly are in darkness wherever we are on the planet. Usually half the planet is dark and half the planet is in sunlight, right? But suddenly everything goes dark. Then what happens is that because of the lack of solar radiation, the heat that comes from the sun, the earth starts cooling very rapidly, very rapidly. And within days or weeks, probably about a week or so, probably less than a week, the earth freezes. All the oceans freeze, everything freezes, and that's the end of life on the earth. Everybody dies. All humans, all animals, everyone dies. Whatever little heat is left available for life on earth is in geothermal vents and all that, deep under the oceans. So those animals that thrive on geothermal energy may survive. Everyone else dies. Photosynthesis ceases because of the lack of light. So then all plants die and all animals die, and there's freezing everywhere and all that. There is that. Then, because the sun no longer exists, the solar wind that is emitted by the sun suddenly disappears, because of which the heliosphere, this big bubble of solar radiation, that disappears around the solar system. And that's how, and because of this, the interstellar medium of outer space outside of the solar system is able to now penetrate the solar system region. So that's a big change that happens. Apart from that, nothing else changes, because the black hole that we have replaced the sun with has the same mass. The orbits of the planets don't change, everything continues the same way, but the the big daddy, the source of heat, disappears, and everything else changes as a consequence. But what if we replace the sun with a black hole that's 10 times the mass of the sun? A different mass, 10 times the mass, or 100 times the mass. What happens? In that case, all the changes that I told you will already happen, but the planets and all the objects in the solar system will now feel a much stronger gravitational attraction to this object at the center of the solar system. So the orbits will shrink, will become much tighter, and the orbital velocities will become much faster, and the orbits will become more elliptical. That's a change that will happen. And this will cause perturbations in the orbits of, and it could cause certain planets to be ejected out of the solar system. It could cause planetary collisions between, let's say, the Earth and Venus, Earth and Mars, or something like that. That could happen. So it will cause significant chaos in the solar system. So this is called a thought experiment, a Gedanken experiment. And it's interesting to see, interesting to do such experiments to see, from a student's perspective, it's interesting to do it, to see how much of a grasp we have on the laws of physics. So it will never happen, obviously, thank God. Thank the gods. But yes, these are the things that could happen, that will happen if the sun gets replaced by a black hole. Rudrajit Sarkar says China has faced so many civil wars throughout its history. Did India face such crises in the past? If yes, then why and when did it happen? If no, then why did China have to face so many civil wars but India did not? I don't think India has faced civil wars. There was a threatened civil war in 1946, Direct Action Day, which was threatened by Jinnah, that if you want to give me the partition of India and Pakistan, then I will give you a civil war. It never happened. But in India's history, we've never had civil wars, as far as I know. We've had the occupation of India by extremely evil foreign forces, the Turks and the Europeans, and they perpetrated all kinds of atrocities on India, genocides, but we didn't have civil war. What is civil war? Civil war is the people fighting people or people fighting the government. So it's chaos all around. We've never had that in India. Never. We've had wars between kingdoms and all that, but civilians were never involved. But what about China? China, if you look at the history of the past roughly 2000 years, I'm sure you can find at least 20 incidences of civil war, which is roughly one civil war every century, which is staggering actually. And some of these civil wars have had death tolls that are astonishingly staggering. For example, the Taiping rebellion that happened in the 19th century had a death toll of 20-30 million people in just about 10-15 years. Then you had the An-Lushan rebellion in the 8th century, which had a death toll about 30 million. And so many other. The Dungan revolt that happened again in the 19th century, which was between the Chinese and the Hui people, the Muslims of East Turkestan, that had a death toll of about, I don't know, at least 10 million. In the Chinese Civil War, Um, from the 1920s to about 1949, 1950, that had a death toll of at least 10 million. So you have these repeated cycles in China, the imperial cycles that always uh, end with a civil war. Roughly one civil war every century. And the death toll is typically astonishing, crazy. And you have famines that usually accompany these civil wars. And in some of these civil wars, you had instances of widespread cannibalism in China. So China has had this pattern, historical pattern. Civil wars, roughly one every century, and complete chaos in the country, in the kingdom, in the empire, whatever you want to call it. But India has never had that. Why is that so, right? Is a very good question. So it's to do with culture, it's to do with geography, it's to do with so many things like that. Culture, geography. So uh, there is something called the Northern China Plain. So let's Google the North China Plain, shall we? Uh, where? Okay, not the map. We will Google the North China Plain. Here we are, North China Plain. So this is a region. Let's go to the images of that. So it is this part of China that you see highlighted in orange. That is historically the heartland of China. The current day nation of China, it encompasses territories that have historically never been Chinese. But let's not discuss that right now. This highlighted region is the Northern China Plain, North China Plain, and a couple of rivers are the bedrock of Chinese civilization. Just a few rivers, the Yellow River, the Mekong, etc., the Huang Ho, the Mekong, and couple of 2 3 rivers are the rivers that have sustained Chinese civilization the past roughly 2,000 3,000 years. So now we go to the map. So this western part of China has been the heartland of China, and that's where Chinese empires have already always taken root, in this region. India, on the other hand, is very different. India is a river valley civilization. There are rivers that mark crisscross the length and the breadth of the Indian subcontinent, all the way across the subcontinent, starting from Gandhar, Afghanistan, all the way to wherever you look in the subcontinent. India is a river valley civilization. China is not. Then China has historically had one language, one culture, and one ethnicity. Not the whole of China as we see it today, but historical, that part of China, the North China Plain that I showed you, that historically has had one culture, one language, one ethnicity. That is the Han culture, the Han Chinese language, and so on. And that's where you've always had the emergence of kingdoms or empires. Now, in China, there's always been this concept. So, the Chinese civilization begins roughly around the 3rd century BC with the Qin dynasty. And you've had major dynasties like the Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty, the Tang dynasty, the Ming dynasty, the Yuan, which is a conquest dynasty, Shri Chinggis Khan and so on. That's all. You had these dynasties, and the Chinese have always had this concept called the mandate of heaven. What's the mandate of heaven? It's the idea that there can only be one legitimate ruler of China at any given point in time. And China obviously is like all culture civilizations, its boundaries have risen and fallen. The boundaries change over time, always. So the mandate of heaven is this idea that there can only be one legitimate ruler of China at any given point in time. That's the mandate of heaven. And this concept, this idea, suggests that a dynasty's rule is sanctioned by the gods, by divine approval. And this mandate of the gods can be lost if the dynasty fails to govern effectively. And in that case, if the mandate of heaven is lost, then it is a duty of the people to rebel against the dynasty and throw it down. And that is what gives rise to the imperial cycles, the rise of a dynasty and empire, which kind of consolidates that region and the rule within it. And because it does well initially, it has the mandate of heaven and it ascends to glory. And eventually, like every dynasty, every empire, it starts doing poorly. It loses the mandate of heaven, And then there's a period of disaster, of chaos, of civil war, which can last a decade, it can last a century, and then a new dynasty comes, and a new imperial cycle starts. That has been the pattern of Chinese history. Now, in Chinese history, the culture has been the Confucian Taoist culture, the Confucian culture, which is the legalistic culture. It's all about obeying the authorities and all that, as opposed to the dharmic culture that we have in India. So in China, 2000 years we've had Buddhism, roughly. But the emperors have never followed Buddhism. They've always been Confucians. And that's the kind of thing it is. So it's a cultural difference, and also the mandate of heaven thing. And that's why China has had these horrific civil wars over and over and over again. In India also has at times been unified under one dynasty, one empire. We have so many examples: the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, the Kushan Empire, the Karkota Empire, the Chola Empire, the Maratha Empire. So many, I can name so many more. But India is fundamentally very different from China. In what ways is India fundamentally different from China? We are not a monoculture like China is. Today, the nation of China is so large, they've taken so many territories from other peoples that it's a multi-ethnic nation. But historically, the Chinese were the Han people, a monoculture, one language, one ethnicity, one culture. In India, Hinduism, the ism that we attribute to the Hindus, that itself is so incredibly diverse. There are so many philosophical schools of thought. There are so many customs and traditions that have been incorporated and absorbed into Hinduism. It's so diverse, and it's completely decentralized. And there are so many languages, hundreds of languages and thousands of dialects in India. So because of this incredible diversity, India genetically is the most diverse part of the planet apart from Africa. And yet it is genetically uniform. It's a very strange conundrum. So because of this diversity, and because of having this plentiful abundance of water and river valleys and all that, we have, between the times when India was unified under one empire, we've had so many periods where India was fragmented into all these little kingdoms. Sometimes big kingdoms, sometimes little kingdoms. And in India, the culture is the dharmic culture, which is at its fundamental level a culture that prioritizes non-violence, avoidable violence. Of course, if violence is required, we've resorted to violence, like Lord Krishna said, destroy the non to achieve dharma, achieve non-violence, you have to destroy the violent, right? That way. But the Indian way of warfare was very different. When kingdoms went to war, they never touched the civilians and so on. We know the thing. That's why we have never had civil wars, because of all these factors, which are very different from the Chinese paradigm, the Chinese context. That's why India has never had civil wars in which civilians get involved. Almost, I can't think of any time period. Probably no, that's not a civil war, right? That's the first war of independence, 1857. That was not a civil war. It was a subcontinent-wide uprising against the British occupiers, which failed at the time, but yeah, that's how it went. So these are the reasons why India and China have had such different trajectories, historical trajectories. China has these imperial cycles and civil war after civil war. India has never had that. This is another question that historians have never bothered to take up. You can write a PhD on this topic too. A comparative study of the historical evolution and trajectory of Indian and Chinese civilizations, with a focus on the civil war and the dynastic cycle and imperial cycle, and the lack of it in India. Such an interesting topic. Nobody bothers to do that. What can I say? Okay, Abhishek Srivastav says, why Bengal tiger and why not Indian tiger? I'll tell you why. Because the British first colonized Bengal in India. Let's go to the map. See, you have Bengal, the West Bengal region. That's the first part of India that the British colonized. And the animal, the scariest animal they saw there was naturally the tiger. So they called it the Bengal tiger, because they were in Bengal, and from their perspective, everything was Bengal. So the British started this terminology, and we have slavishly, idiotically, imbecilically, moronically continued that. Now so maybe this will offend some people from Bengal who will say, why are you trying to take away our national our state animal or whatever? Yeah, let's go to Google and let's see the distribution of tiger territory in India. Okay, so I will say Indian tiger. It will give me Bengal tiger. I can predict that already. Indian tiger. It will say Bengal tiger. There you have it. It will say Bengal tiger. I predicted that before it happened. Now let's go inside the Wikipedia article. Statutory warning: Wikipedia is not necessarily a reliable source of information, especially for Indian history. We're just going through it for the sake of saving time. Here is the range of the Bengal tiger in red. All across northern India, Nepal, Himachal Pradesh, etc., Bhutan, the far eastern regions of India, Arunachal Pradesh, etc., central India, lots of places, western India, lots of places, and so on. And what about the region of Bengal, which is Bangladesh in West Bengal? Very little. So why is this the Bengal tiger? It should be the Indian tiger, naturally. It's historically been found all across India, not just in Bengal. The British called it the Bengal tiger because they had landed in Bengal and they saw it there. But they were not aware that it's all across India. They came to know later, but they continued calling it the Bengal tiger. And after 1947, our wonderful intellectuals slavishly have continued calling it the Bengal tiger. It is the Indian tiger. It should be called the Indian tiger. I have nothing against Bengal, but look at the distribution of the tiger in Bengal. Hardly a handful. It's the Indian tiger. And the Bengal variant is not some subspecies of the Indian tiger. It is just the Indian tiger. So it should be the Indian tiger, but we are so deeply mentally colonized that these simple things also we don't notice. So I would like to thank Abhishek Srivastava for pointing this out. It is the Indian tiger, not the Bengal tiger. Okay. Minal says, how can we improve the state of agriculture, the condition of agriculture in Bharat, and make Bharat an export hub? As we are good with agriculture, but we don't excel there. And how do we educate our farmers? So, if I recall correctly, more than half of the of Bharat's population is engaged in agriculture and agriculture allied activities. I think close to 55% of our population is engaged in either agriculture or things related to agriculture. But the contribution of agriculture to India's GDP is less than 20%, maybe 18, 19%, if my memory serves me right. Why is it so? So, what can we do about this? First of all, we have to understand that this entire situation, the root cause of that is the British practice of the Rayatwari system that they had instituted in India, which stole the land from Indians and placed it in the hands of zamindars. They continued the Mughal practice and took it nationwide. So people who today, most Indians don't own land. Most Indians don't own land. Historically, everybody had land. The British stole the land of the Indians, put it in the hands of the government and the zamindars, and then forced Indians to do subsistence farming on those small parcels of land that they would be allotted. And that's how they ruined India. So today you have people who are engaged in agriculture, more than half the population, but it's very inefficient and it contributes less than 20% of the nation's GDP. What should be done? I'll tell you something. If you give most Indians engaged in agriculture a chance, they will move away from agriculture. They would like to do something else. Because historically, most Indians were not engaged in agriculture. India was the world's first fully industrialized civilization. We had our own industries and people had all these occupations and whatever trades that they specialized in. All that was destroyed and people were forced into subsistence farming by the British. That's how they deindustrialized India. So if you give most people a chance, they will move away from agriculture. So what needs to happen is this. We need to mechanize the agriculture. We need to bring the agricultural practices in the 21st century. If you look at the biggest agricultural exporters in the world, let's say the biggest agricultural exporters of wheat would probably be the US or Russia or Ukraine used to be the one, right? They have industrial agriculture. So maybe 2-3% of the population is engaged in agriculture, but they have access to the modern equipment, the big machines and all that, which are incredibly efficient. So in these developed countries, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5% of the population is engaged in agriculture, but they contribute way more of the GDP. So that's what we need in India. For that, we will need to have a booming economy. We will need to have sufficient job production so that people can be brought out of agriculture. And then we can have agriculture becoming more efficient with the use of industrial and methods and better machines and all that. So that's the kind of thing we need in India. You can't have 55% of your population doing agriculture with very little return. It's bad for everyone. So we do need to get better at agriculture. We are reasonably self-sufficient in most things. We import pulses, etc., from various countries, Africa, and so on. But overall, we're in a good spot. But I'm sure we can do better than what we are doing right now. So we need to get more people actually out of agriculture, give them actual good prospects in various industries and all that. And the ones who remain in agriculture, they should be able to do it way more efficiently than what is being done right now. Shubham Vavare says, how to bring civic sense in Indians. It's very easy. Implement the Arthashastra. I'm serious. The Arthashastra is not just about economics, it's about governance. It's about how to govern an empire. And it prescribes various kinds of punishments and so on and so forth for various offenses. It prescribes how government officials should comport themselves and so on. What needs to happen? It's very simple. Civic sense means a lack of civic sense means lack of standards, lack of behavioral standards, lack of good habits and all, spitting on the road, littering everywhere and so on. Let's talk about littering. Let's talk about the fact that in many Indian towns and cities, you have garbage on the streets. Why is it so? First of all, because there is no punishment for littering and dumping stuff wherever you want. You're eating a pack of junk food, chips. You done? You just dump it wherever it is and move on. That's typically what Indians do, right? There is no fine. There's no punishment for it. You make it such that if somebody does such a thing, punishment is guaranteed in a timely manner. Then people will stop doing it. Then that's one example. Spitting is another example. Look at what Singapore did. They implemented harsh fines for all these offenses, and they made it a certainty that if you do that, if you break the law, you're going to be punished. Guarantee in a certain amount of time. So people stopped doing that because it was painful. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. It's not a defect of Indian society. It's a defect of Indian governance that there are no punishments for these behaviors, and that's how people slowly their standards decline, the standards drop. That's all it is. You have to ensure that punishment is guaranteed. It doesn't have to be really harsh punishments, but it should be. It doesn't need to be harsh, but the punishments should be inconveniences to the people who are being punished. You have to go and appear in court and spend one day there. You lose one day. It's an inconvenience more than a punishment, and you have to pay a fine. Let's say 1,000 rupees, but you have to turn up at the court in so and so time, wait in line, and then you wait your turn and come in front of the judge, listen to a dressing down and scolding, and then your name is displayed somewhere for doing something, and then you pay the fine, that sort of thing. You waste a day. It's an inconvenience, and you'd never want to have that again, right? So guarantee this sort of punishment. Then everybody will behave. Why do Indians behave so well outside the country? Why are Indians the most law-abiding people outside the country? Because in those countries, punishment for such things is guaranteed, almost guaranteed. And Indians naturally are law-abiding people. So that's how we do it. It's a failure of the governance system that you don't have civic sense in Indians. Okay. Shrey Bansal says, I live in Dublin, Ireland, And I see that no one here, Dublin. Dublin. Is it Ireland? Or is it Scotland? It's the capital of the Republic of Ireland. Scotland is Edinburgh. Okay. So Shrey Bansal lives in Dublin. And I see that no one here speaks Gaelic or Irish. School students even joke that they would rather learn German or Spanish as it would be more useful in the job market. So I often wonder, how do languages die? Can the same happen to our Indian languages, as these days we see more and more people speaking English proudly, where most words in a sentence are English and only a few are in Hindi? Is this normal? Also, countries like Ireland have extremely small armies. They have about 7,500 soldiers. Good point. How do they survive, and does, depending on the US and the EU, take away their sovereignty? Let me answer the second part of the question first. If a nation has 7,500 soldiers, that nation is colonized. Okay? It's not a sovereign nation. So yes, Ireland's sovereignty has been taken over by the UK, by the US. EU? Yeah, of course, yeah. Ireland hasn't done Brexit, right? Northern Ireland is under British occupation, that which has suffered Brexit, but Ireland hasn't. So Ireland is a member of the EU, probably NATO as well, if I'm not mistaken, and then that's where all the sovereignty disappears. So Ireland is not a sovereign nation. If you have 7,500 soldiers under, is Ireland a member of NATO? Let me see. Ireland, NATO. I'm quickly Googling. Okay, Ireland is not a member of NATO, but good for it. But, well, makes no real difference. You're part of the Anglosphere, despite not being an English speaking nation. Sad. So, coming to the main part of the question, no one speaks Gaelic or Irish in Ireland. And students joke they would learn a foreign language rather than their own language because it's more useful in the job market. It's very similar to what's happening in India. Like you point out rightfully, most Indians speak, Hindi speaking people speak English, a combination of English and Hindi. And that's how languages die. When you no longer value your language, and it's not, the government has to step in and ensure that the education system is based in Indian languages and the mother tongues of students. And secondly, that the job market does not require you to know English. Should make it illegal, should make it a punishable offense for a company to require that you speak good English to get a job. So these things have to be implemented. That's called decolonization, and we are not doing that, and that's why it's killing our languages. Where is the literature in local Indian languages? Hardly a few publications. Most regional language publishers have disappeared. If it continues this way, in a century, you will have hardly any Indian culture left. Most Indian languages will be dead. That's what will happen. This is how languages die. You can actually map the process of the ongoing death of a language. So yeah, it's happening to our Indian languages, and in many Indian languages will die out in the next few decades if nothing is changed. And right now, nothing is being done to change it. So that's where I am very disappointed with the Modi government. What have they done to strengthen India's culture and languages? Tell me the top 5 initiatives the government has taken in the field of culture and civilization and language. Nothing. It's very disappointing. And yeah, that's all I can say about this. Swastika says, is arranged marriage a bad thing? It's looked down upon in the West. It's considered to be embarrassing. But it's a millennia old tradition and apparently considered one of the reasons for lower than average divorce rate in India. And I believe it's helpful for those who don't like to date and see dating as a burden. But will this tradition disappear as Indians are wannabe Americans? Though I've read that even many Americans complain about how hard the dating scene has become. Nothing wrong with love marriage, but it's helpful to have options in a society, as not every individual is the same. Is arranged marriage a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. It's been the practice not just in India, but other parts of the world also for thousands of years. King Richard the First of England, Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard the Lionheart, he arranged his marriage with Berengaria of Spain. Her father's name was Sancho, if I remember. Uh, Richard the First, he arranged his sister's marriage to, I forget who, Toledo. He tried to arrange his sister's marriage, Sister Joanna's marriage, to the son of Saladin. And there are so many examples of arranged marriages in the West. And in non-aristocratic society, also marriages would be arranged. So it's always been there. It's only in recent times that the West has uprooted its own traditions, and now they claim that whatever they're doing right now at the present moment is the right thing. And we, being the mentally colonized society that we are, saddled with this deep inferiority complex, we have to copy and ape, slavishly ape everything the West does. Look, I am not saying that everybody should have an arranged marriage. You can have a love marriage too. Why not? Nothing wrong with it. But why do you have to look down upon arranged marriages? And you are right. I think one of the reasons why the average divorce rate is so low in India is because of arranged marriages. So I have nothing against love marriages. I have nothing against arranged marriages either. It's a tradition that we've had. It's a custom we've had. It's been part of our culture, civilization. And why do we have to kill that? At the end of the day in life, what really matters is that you have a stable marriage and peace between the two partners. And very often in these love marriages, unless you're lucky, it very often goes bad. Because there's so many factors that go into a stable marriage. There has to be compatibility, not just between the two individuals, but between the families. The family cultures should match, and the values and the standards should match, and so much needs to match. And often it's issues beyond the two individuals who are married that cause the rift. And arranged marriages prevent all that. But yeah, we are a deeply, deeply mentally colonized society. We are in the process of dismantling everything that we have had for thousands of years and just blindly aping the West. The West is going to collapse. Western society is going to collapse in a few years and decades. It's the process is beginning. It's already begun. It's in process. And we want to jump into that fire. It's so unfortunate. And how do we combat that? By teaching our culture to our kids, by reforming the education system. But the government won't do that. The government won't do that. Okay, Rodrajit Sarkar says, why is Central and South America insignificant? So insignificant in world politics. Good question. Let's go to the map. Central South America. Central America starts with Mexico, then we have Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And of course, you have Belize, Honduras, El Salvador. And then you have South America, which is Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and all the other nations. The biggest ones are obviously Brazil and Argentina. And you have a wonderful Chile as well. And all of these nations are geopolitically insignificant. Brazil is a member of BRICS, but Brazil is Brazil. So if you go back in history, you will see that the Americans had something called the Monroe Doctrine. All these nations in South America, they used to be European colonies. All were European colonies. Europeans had divided up the land among themselves, various European countries, kingdoms, and they were in the process of extracting everything of value out of the place, out of these territories. Then an incredible phenomenon burst upon the scene. Napoleon Bonaparte. And the Napoleonic Wars ensued, and all these European kingdoms lost control of the territories in the Americas. And that's how these new nations emerged. Then the Americans, the United States, they were worried the Europeans will once again try to reassume control over these nations. So that's why they instituted the Monroe Doctrine. Initially, the British cooperated with the Americans in enforcing the Monroe Doctrine, but then the Americans became powerful in their own right. And they ensured that no other power could influence anything in the Americas. North America, Central America, South America. And today, if you see, and they have instituted various regime change operations, etc., in the Americas, the Americans. Pinochet is example, and much more. And that's how they have maintained complete control over these nations in the Americas. And today, every single nation in the Americas is a vassal of the United States. And that's why Central and South America are insignificant in world politics. Okay. So what else do we have? I'm out of questions. I still have more questions, but let me take some questions from the chat now. Live chat. For a few minutes before I end today's session, because we have already gone past 2 hours. Okay. Romans worshipped Mitra. Assyria has a city called Assur. Zoroastrians worshipped Varuna. Can you please explain the connections to ancient Hinduism? The world was interconnected. The ancient world for thousands of years was interconnected. Mitra, Varun are the deities that emerged out of Hinduism, out of the Vedic pantheon. And the worship of Mitra eventually reached Rome, out of India. That's a guarantee. Asur may or may not be related to India. The Zoroastrians obviously worshipped Varuna, who is Uranos in the Greek Roman pantheon. So the ancient world, as in ancient Eurasia, you had lots and lots of distinct local manifestations of the same culture and the same pantheon of gods with different names. And that's the connection with ancient Hinduism. And of all these cultures, the oldest is the Rig Vedic Hindu culture. Okay. What else do we have? Let's go all the way down and see what questions. Abhijit Putin, KGB agent. What's your view on Poland's Blinken remark? They didn't exactly use that language. They told him to go to hell or something. They didn't ask him to F off. Those parliamentarians, those MPs, they told Blinken to get out or leave or go to hell or something. So what's happening is the Ukraine war is going badly, obviously, for Ukraine and for the West. It's a disaster for the country of Ukraine. It's a complete disaster. It's tragic for Ukraine. But eventually Ukraine will be spent and there will be nothing left in Ukraine, for no more soldiers left to fight. So who's next? Well, look at the map. Who's next? That's what the Americans are looking now. So if you look at the region, if you look west of Ukraine, you have Poland. The Americans are trying to turn Poland into a new European superpower, military superpower. They're selling it weapons and all that. And they would, if Ukraine eventually falls, which it eventually most likely will, to the Russians, then the Americans will then want Poland to get involved in the next phase of the war. And that's why the Polish MPs, who understand what the Americans are doing very well, they told Blinken, the Secretary of State, to get lost. Because he apparently has reached Poland to set the foundation, the groundwork, to involve Poland in the next phase of the war. And that will ruin Poland the same way it's ruined Ukraine. So there you have it. Harsh says the recent news popped up saying that India, China have agreed on working with urgency on the LAC disengagement. I've already discussed this in depth about an hour ago. So yes, something is afoot. I'm glad. Okay. Kabir Gambhir says, I'm a student at DTU, a Tier 1 college. They teach almost all subjects pathetically, unsurprisingly, with no visualization. Some are good due to the professors, but if this is in DTU, a top tier college, what about Tier 2 or 3 colleges? That is the story of the Indian education system. Garbage, trash, rotten. What can I say? And what's genuinely unfortunate is that nothing is being done to address this. New education policy 2022 or 24, or whatever the number is, it is nothing. It solves no real problem. It doesn't do anything. It's just a cosmetic exercise, an exercise in cosmetics. So I'm sorry that you're going through this. Everybody else is going through this. And I don't know what the solution is. The government isn't doing a thing to solve this problem. Sad. Okay, I'll take this question and end it over here. Dheeraj Kamath says, why is the BCCI not cancelling the cricket series with Bangladesh, with East Pakistan, in the wake of the horrific, unmitigated atrocities against the Hindus? How spineless and cowardly are they? Um, yeah, it's. I believe the East Pakistan team has reached India to play that series. I don't know how many matches or whatever there is, but there's something. I think, look, these series are planned years in advance. Um, and I'm sure there will be legal and other repercussions to canceling the series. So maybe that's why they're not canceling the series. No, don't mix politics and sport, apparently, or something. I would not go to the extent of calling them spineless and cowardly. They have to run. See, the BCCI is running a business. They're the most powerful cricket board on the planet. It's an asset to have as a nation. So, I will not be so harsh on the BCCI and say that they're spineless and cowardly. They're just trying to run the game in the country. Understand that the BCCI is an asset for India. It's the most powerful body in the sport of cricket, and it gives India a tremendous amount of control and power in this particular sport. So it's a good thing to have. And yeah, but I would actually have preferred to have the series cancelled in light of the horrors that are being perpetrated on the Hindus of Bangladesh. I totally agree. So maybe it's not for the BCCI to decide this. Maybe the government of India would have to step in, if it will step in. I doubt it will, because of various diplomatic and other reasons. Mr. Modi has been emphasizing this repeatedly, that there is the need in Bangladesh to safeguard the lives and the interests of Hindus there. He has raised this issue at multiple levels. Will he take the step of cancelling the series with East Pakistan? I'm not sure about that, but I would not lay that onus on the BCCI. If a series has to be cancelled, the decision has to be taken at a higher level. So yeah, it's complicated. Maybe we will not do that. But I am not particularly happy to see the Bangladesh team in India right now, the East Pakistan team. So I will leave it at that. And with that, I'm going to end this session. 2 hours plus minutes, 2 hours, 13 minutes now. So thank you so much for all your questions. And I will see you in the sessions that we do next week. So please keep asking questions. Like I say, please keep raising your standards, keep improving yourselves, keep doing the things that are difficult but good for you. And thank you once again for all the questions. I'll see you in the live streams that I'll do next week. So take care.